Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Broker channel here at YouTube, and it's definitely been a while since I've done a video. As you can tell, this room looks familiar. Yeah, for the time being, I am back up here in my room in Susanville, where I originally was doing my videos from. So this is kind of going to be very nostalgic, and that's kind of the point for this one, but it's basically is reassessing my thoughts with some of my past favorites. And it's definitely going to be on one band for certain here, but it's definitely based off of recently getting a record, or at least adding a record from the band into my collection. Just something I was missing. But in the meantime, this is definitely playing in the background. It's been a while since I've actually listened to this album, but Total Head Removal from Wolfpack, their only album. I'll have to do a video on basically every sort of one album, band, whatever, at least good albums made by bands who only put out one record, and this one would definitely be in that video for certain. That's definitely going to be more of a future topic, but right now, this is what's playing in the background. Again, it's more like British speed thrash metal. A band that almost were kind of considered, or at least might have been part of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. However, again, they were just so late to the game, though, so this is kind of a sort of a late record, but it's really not pure new wave or British heavy metal. It's just straight up thrash, speed thrash, whatever, and that sort of early onslaught of warfare, maybe. I wouldn't even go that far, but it's close to that. Really solid album. I've always loved this record, so but right now this video is really not about Total Head Removal, but I just wanted to kind of put a record on in the background, so I just chose Total Head Removal, since it's been such a definitely been some years since I've at least last played this album. Alright, so what is the band in question here? Move this stuff out of the way. Since being back up here in Susanville, I've now been able to go back through my records. And as I was, and since my birthday came up, I felt it was about time that I made a trip up to Reno to go to Recycled Records, and this time with the mindset of buying a few records besides just CDs. So what came out, and this is what ended up sparking this whole video in general, is Life's a Bitch by Raven. And this is just what did it. And after finally, acquiring this album, it definitely was a missing record in my collection. I used to always see it a lot anyways at Recycled Records, but I never really pulled the trigger until after really getting heavily into Raven. Of course, it was at Recycled Records where I actually got Wiped Out. And I used to see Life's a Bitch within that bin, alongside even a copy of Rockin' Till You Drop. But I didn't get this album from Recycled Records. It would have been Spinners in Fresno. And I would see here as well Stay Hard. But I didn't get this record as well from Recycled Records. I got it down at I forgot the name of the record store in Fresno, but it wasn't Spinners, because by the time I had gotten this, Spinners had at least closed down. But I never really saw a copy of the Mad EP. But they did also have a copy of the Pack Is Back during that period. But I never grabbed it. I was always kind of afraid of getting that record. And of course, after getting into Raven, I pretty much understood why. But the whole point of this is, after finally getting more and more comfortable with Raven, and of course, even seeing them live about a couple years ago in Fresno performing this album in its entirety, I basically was just, here and there going back and forth and just listening to most of their albums, at least what I knew. Of course, recently, at the same time that I had gotten this record, which would have been maybe a couple weeks ago, I also ended up finding copies for One for All and Walk Through Fire. But again, the whole point here is, what really is my favorite Raven album of their 80s period, their entire 80s catalog? That means pretty much starting with their very first full-length album, Rock Until You Drop. Pretty much we've been ending, of course, towards Nothing Exceeds Like Excess, which sadly I don't have a copy of, and that's been a very hard record for me to come by. Of course, I've been looking out for certain copies, and eventually I will add that in. Still, right now, this is just going to be ending at Life's a Bitch. So after listening to Life's a Bitch, after, just getting it, finally, I remember first listening to it as a download, and I always really liked the album, but just acquiring it physically this time, I've really kind to reassess my thoughts on whether or not if that's my favorite Raven album. Of course, if there's one album that is missing from the vinyl collection here, that would be All for One, which I do have a copy of, and it is a part of the that over-the-top box set, the CD box set that was it H&E Hear No Evil Records had released about a few years ago, but that's in a storage unit in Fresno, so I can't really show that album, but I have listened to it, and it is definitely up there as one of my favorites. But what really is just completely sparking this whole thing is that, yes, at this point, we all know that this album is a bona fide classic alongside, Wiped Out and, of course, All for One. Those are all bona fide classics. However, once I made the transition to Atlantic Records and beginning, of course, starting with this album here, Stay Hard, things began to really become very sketchy with the band. And of course, we all know that The Pack is Back is a complete abysmal piece of shit. And of course, after that, when they were going to be supposedly were going to be going on tour with Twisted Sister, they eventually had after again, of course, knowing where they made a mistake with, of course, being manipulated by Atlantic sort of demands, they knew that they screwed up. They knew that they were completely shooing away their entire fan base. They were completely running them off. So they knew they made a mistake, and with getting on tour with Twisted Sister, they had, of course, the inspiration to get back into the studio to release and record the Mad EP. Of course, we all know that the tour with Twisted Sister completely went dead. It disbanded, and take a very good guess on why. And it has nothing to do with Raven. Still, at least we got this out of it, and this was a bit of a return. Not a complete return, but it was at least a bit of an apology after releasing such a piece of shit that was The Pack is Back. And eventually after that, what will become their final album on Atlantic, they at least release what I've now come to realize is the best thing they ever released under the Atlantic label, and that being Life's a Bitch, which is, I think, at this point, it's been becoming one of my all-time favorite albums from this band, and it's just as close you were at the time of '87 you were going to get to Raven being Raven. Of course, after this of course then led into Nothing Exceeds IXS. Since then, they've at least been way more consistent. And again, they realized that they were making they made a big mistake releasing that abysmal piece of shit that is The Pack is Back. However, the whole point, me getting back to actually listening to their more commercial period, I don't have a copy of The Pack is Back at this point. Maybe it's for good, but eventually I will add it in just as, well, collection filler. But right now, to focus on these three records here, a lot of glare, I'm pretty much assessing in general as far as these 80s Raven albums are concerned, towards from Stay Hard up to about Nothing Exceeds IXS. I think I may have to really say that of all the Raven albums from this period, I think Life's a Bitch in general is really becoming one of my favorites. And maybe I kind of prefer this one over All For One. I know that might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, and that's not me trying to disparage or completely just disregard All For One. That still is a very good album. But as far as maybe hooks or memorability, I kind of find this one to be a bit more memorable. Maybe that could just be due to the fact that I listened to this one a lot longer than I actually had, at least with All For One. But really the point, I think both Life's a Bitch and All For One are practically on par as being very similar albums. And that's kind of where I then get into just my thoughts of most recently re-listening to Stay Hard. Yes, I'm going to say this. I'm really going to come off and say that when I first did finally get this album about a few or so years ago, I do remember really liking it a lot, and I really enjoyed it. And there's definitely is some good songs on here, like, again, When the Going Gets Tough, Even Get It Right, Power on the Glory, and of course, there, Extract the Action. These are definitely probably by far the best songs on the album, especially When the Going Gets Tough, Get It Right, and Extract the Action are probably three of the best songs on the album, with, of course, Power on the Glory being somewhere behind. But as a whole, after re-listening to it, especially coming off the heels of especially re-listening to Life's a Bitch, this is kind of a mediocre record. This really is a very mediocre record, and I can understand why many people kind of felt underwhelmed after, of course, coming off the heels of All For One. This really felt very underwhelming. And, of course, it was going to get way more underwhelming afterwards. They really were going to about to jump the fucking shark with The Pack is Back, which this, of course, and in all honesty, is better than The Pack is Back, but at the same time, that really isn't saying much because of, compared to everything else that they have released, this really is a very weak album. Thankfully, again, they got back on track with the Mad EP, and of course, I just respun it anyways, and this still is a very good record. I still enjoy the EP, of course. By far, the two best songs on the album are the ones that are on the first side. The A side, that being Speed of the Reflex and Do or Die. Both these two, if any, let's say, self-respecting Raven fan who felt like that they got their hearts broken with The Pack is Back, if they had at least bought this afterwards, and just by the first half of this EP, yeah, they definitely were gonna be like, yeah, this is Raven, they're back. But still, even the songs on the second half, side 2, are also very enjoyable. So I think all in all, this is a much more enjoyable album than Stay Hard. But finally, once we got to Life's a Bitch, would be their final album on the Atlantic Records label, and it would also be the final album for drummer Rob Wacko Hunter, who would pretty much be out of the band after this. By the way, I gotta get up and switch the sides on the record here, so just give me a second here. That was a very quick one. Alright, to get back on track with Life's a Bitch. Again, I was definitely enjoying the Mad EP, but again, putting this back on, just pretty much before I even started recording, there is definitely no doubt that this is the best full-length album, and I'm gonna definitely argue the best release that Raven had, at least put, under the Atlantic Records label. I mean, yes, it's definitely getting back to being a little bit more longer. It's almost about the same length, let's say, as, this one right there, or even maybe a little bit, maybe a couple minutes shorter than, well, this record right here too, Wiped Out. But even the vibe is kind of there. Everything about this album I felt was easily a bit of a return to form. I wouldn't say just a bit. I'm just completely just babbling on like a jackass. But yeah, everything just seems to be a return to form with this album, and why they were completely back on being way more consistent afterwards. I mean, an album opens up with one of the strongest songs on the album, being The Savage and the Hungry. Then into, again, just classic Raven, Pick Your Window. The title track is fucking fantastic on this one. But then, again, Never Forgive, Iron League. On the Wings of an Eagle is more kind of getting closer to even like modern sounding Raven. And it's definitely a longer song, but it just has a lot of that almost grandiose, very just epic sort of compositions. And it is so memorable, and it is definitely as metal as Raven could get back to being. I mean, they never really stopped completely being a metal band, but everything was pushing it with like the Pack Is Back, and which this album is definitely 100% not. And of course, Overload, which is again more of the getting closer to the sort of feel that you might get on Nothing Exceeds, like Excess. Then of course, You're a Liar. Only the Strong Survive. Juggernaut, which is it's a slower mid-paced track, but it's got a ton of heaviness to it. It's as heavy as a ton of bricks. And of course, ending off with Playing with the Razor. Again, these are all classic Raven here. Feel the Fire is more closer to something, let's say, like, what's the song on this one, Wiped Out? Hold Back the Fire. It's a little closer to this one. But again, that's part of the point, is to reclaim the feel, the whole personality, the charisma of Wiped Out. And of course, Rock Until You Drop. So again, this really is possibly my favorite album by Raven in general. If I were to do a top 10 Raven list, this definitely would be towards the top of my list in general. It definitely would. I think this is a very underrated album in general. May not be, especially with the most recent sort of newer fans that have come to really get into Raven. But this album is still a very solid album, and it is definitely worth a reassessment, especially for those who might have still didn't really check this album out because they were so afraid of what it was gonna, if it was gonna continue the feel whatever of the Pack is Back against being on the Atlantic label, which is completely gonna be like the kiss of death. You know, it's the stench of grisly death was definitely being written with the Atlantic label, but again, don't be afraid. This album is everything as bit of those early Raven records, and even more newer Raven albums in general. So it is still worth your time. So that's kind of where I'm at right now when it comes to my overall assessment, my thoughts on most of the Raven albums I at least have heard. I mean, I do dig a lot of the later albums. I like Extermination, though I think I've come to actually prefer this one over Extinction when it comes to the final two albums with Joe Hasselvander on drums. But again, there's definitely solid albums. Of course, the last two albums here, All Hell's Breaking Loose and Metal City, which is in my CD box over there. Those are, again, great, fantastic albums, with All Hell's Breaking Loose being the best of the two, especially with the newer guy, Mike Heller. Again, just all great fucking albums. But, again, for classic Raven, right here, of my favorites out of any of these records, if I'm going to have to really do a bit of a quick sort of rundown, it probably would, for me, go... I'm going to have to probably go with Wiped Out first, number one, then into Rock Until You Drop. I personally will, and you know what, I think I will probably put this one at number 3 as far as records here, because of, again, this is one I've spent a lot of time listening to for years, and it's always been a favorite of mine, and it's still going to get the top spot over Life's a Bitch, but again, after that, it definitely would be Life's a Bitch. Both these are great. There you go. That's just a bit of a video I just wanted to do right now, just talking about what my current sort of thoughts are on a lot of the Raven albums I have in my collection. So if you have your personal favorites, let me know what they are in the comment section. But for those who have yet to really, let's say, rediscover some of these Raven albums, for certain I have to still point you towards this one. It's still worth getting. And hell, I don't think you can find this one for any more cheaper than, let's say, for how much I paid, which is $12. So for like a $12 Raven album, it is everything worth $12 for me. It is worth it. So there you go. So until then, this is Reassessing. I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone. And also, if you ever find this out in the wild for a very reasonable price, do grab this as well. So there you go. Take care.